This week in the news, game development is difficult. More at 11.
Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the launch of action RPG Wolcen, a new patch going through to the Diablo 3 test server, some other action RPG news, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the video description below, but right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date on gaming news highlights. Now in our first story, some sad news for fans of System Shock. It appears that System Shock 3 is now less likely than ever. According to a new report by VideoGamesChronicle.com, at least a dozen senior System Shock 3 devs have left the game studio over the past 5 months. And according to one dev who wished to remain anonymous, the entire team has allegedly been let go. Let's hope this isn't the end of the story of System Shock 3's troubled development, but simply the end of a chapter. And speaking of stories coming to an end, Anthem. BioWare's highly anticipated looter-shooter released almost a year ago now, but the game released to mixed reviews, did not hit sales goals, and as admitted by EA's CEO, failed to retain players as much as they would have liked. But a new blog post has now been released by BioWare General Manager Casey Hudson. In it, Hudson commits to the long-term support of Anthem as a game, and basically says that they're going to rebuild the game from the ground up, using what has worked well as a basis and changing pretty much everything else. As a consequence, that means that the current version of the game will effectively be on life support until the new version launches, getting a lot less content in the meantime than would have otherwise been expected. So the good news is that Anthem will hopefully be relaunched as a much better game. And the bad news is, for those who still play it, things might get a little dull in the meantime. Moving on to action RPG news, a new action RPG-ish game will be entering Steam Early Access on February 18th. The game is called Adore, and it's a monster taming action roguelite. And what I find most interesting about this is that it seems that instead of having traditional skills, like in an action RPG, you capture monsters, a little bit like Pokemon, and then you can deploy those monsters as skills. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses, they do their own things, similarly how different skills would operate. But it's not just some visual effect, these are still pets that you are deploying, their life is tied to your life, and I hope that the small team behind this game is onto something innovative, fun, engaging. Next, onto some Wolcen news. After many years of anticipation, a game that I've been looking forward to, I've been covering on this channel in multiple videos over the past few years, the game has finally launched. In case you haven't seen it, I have 3 videos up currently. One is my first impressions on the game based on a pre-release build that the devs gave me. Second is an overview explaining all the game's systems, and third is a build guide. Now it seems I wasn't the only one really looking forward to this game, because it actually wound its way to the top of Steam's global top sellers, which, while great on one hand for the devs, did lead to some rather unfortunate situations for players. As we've seen time and time again from numerous AAA dev studios, game launches can be difficult. Upon the game's launch, players found themselves struggling to play the game's online mode. Us Diablo 3 players can certainly relate. The devs, however, did their best to stay on top of things and also communicate early and often with players on the issues. They took to Reddit saying that authentication issues are progressively being resolved. They posted again saying we're still working on the server issues. They updated again saying additional servers and server capacity is being deployed. And a status update, new servers are now deployed and the situation has improved. Then some players were also reporting a number of bugs and the devs were working on hotfixes for them, again communicating. And they even released a full blog post explaining the entire situation, what's going on, and what they're doing to fix things. Quote, "Yesterday we launched our first game and we were astonished to see that so many players joined us on that journey. We've now reached a new peak of 62,000 players. Our highest peak before that was under 2,000. Although it makes us happy that we reached such high numbers, it unfortunately led to some issues on the servers. When the game launched, we were already in contact with our server partners to increase the charge of the servers in case of a high number of connections. But the numbers raised insanely fast and the simultaneous attempts to join the servers also caused issues with the authentication. we had to ask for more capacity there as well. The number of players has somehow stabilized, but we might experience other peaks this evening and during the weekend, and we're doing our best to prepare our servers for that. Right now we have more servers, more space, and this evening we will also apply a hotfix that will resolve some server and client crashes, improve authentication, and reduce the amount of disconnection from game services. We will also add a safeguard regarding quest progression loss. They go on to highlight some bugs that people are experiencing and what they're working on to resolve them. Interestingly, these bugs weren't in the version of the game that I played. Again, I had a pre-release build. It had certain other minor bugs, but the devs said that they would have those resolved by launch. But my fiance worked as QA in the video game industry for a number of years, so I understand how different builds of a game, different versions, you can have bugs reemerge, disappear. Devs might be simultaneously working on 2 different versions of the game and things could get crossed. What it comes down to is that game development is difficult, and Wolcen Studios here, this is their first game launch. This is an indie studio releasing their first game, and it does look like they're trying to do their best to stay on top of fixing the bugs and fixing the server issues and communicating with players and doing all of this as soon as possible. It's obviously and understandably disappointing when you get a new game and you're not able to play the game properly. But as I said in last week's video, I wouldn't condemn a whole game due to a less than ideal launch. And I'm especially more forgiving of indie devs when even AAA devs can't seem to get these launches right. In other action RPG news, Torchlight 3. We recently spoke about how Torchlight Frontiers has now been reworked and rebranded into Torchlight 3. Well, on Wednesday during my stream, I got special permission from the developer and publisher to livestream on Twitch Torchlight 3. And while doing so, CEO of developer Extra Games Max Schaefer and project lead and Extra co-founder Tyler Thompson came by to answer questions and talk about Torchlight. I will make a YouTube video with highlights of all that, but I also encourage you to follow me on Twitch to be notified in case I'm ever doing something like this again. And my preliminary thoughts here on Torchlight 3 are that it is a distinct improvement over Torchlight Frontiers. They kept all the good stuff from Torchlight Frontiers, and they've addressed a lot of the criticisms that I had of the game. Most notably, the pacing feels much better now. But do stay tuned for more Torchlight 3 coverage. And lastly, with some Diablo news. We've gotten official word that Season 19 shall end March 1st. And a new update has been put forth onto the test server for upcoming Season 20. Highlights from this update include a note that Crusaders may be nerfed a little bit more because even though they were nerfed, they're still performing a little bit too high. This is specifically referencing the Valor Satyr. The new Witch Doctor set is getting a buff. The 4-piece damage reduction is being upped from 50% to 60%. I think that's great because it did feel a little bit too squishy. They retooled Spirit Barrage to help with performance issues, but the intent is not to nerf Spirit Barrage. On Gazing Demise though, they did however reduce the attack rate granted to Manitou Spectres. But then the most significant change, in my opinion, is that the Ring of Emptiness no longer requires enemies to be affected by both Haunt and Locust Swarm in order to deal its increased damage, but only one or the other. This is huge because this means that Witch Doctors now get an extra skill slot. And it doesn't just affect this build, but Jade Witch Doctors as well. Then for the new Barbarian set, they changed the 2-piece to work with more than just fear, but also with frozen effects. I think this is a great change because fear effects in general in this game are undesirable. Fear effects make enemies run away. That can get annoying when you're trying to kill an enemy. They also changed the 4-piece bonus to grant a little bit more toughness and to let Frenzy last twice as long, and I think that second bit especially was very important. The Frenzy buff falls off so quick, and this is a build that really specializes in killing elites and not killing everything on screen. But if in order to travel to an elite you have to every 5 seconds hit an enemy, it made for a little bit of clumsy gameplay, so this is a really great change. Then for Wizard, they fixed a bunch of the Wizard bugs that were on the test server. A big bug was that basically Arcane Torrent was being way too effective with Etch Sigil and Death Wish. They nerfed the Serpent Sparker and the Magistrate because basically people were using Legacy of Dreams instead of the new set because Legacy of Dreams would be able to out DPS the new set and it would be far, far, far easier to run. run, so instead they increased the damage on the 6-piece set bonus for the new wizard set. And for the 4-piece bonus, they set an internal cooldown of 2 seconds on Hydra head loss. Every time you take damage, a Hydra head dies. You need Hydra heads to gain your damage and your toughness, but now you cannot lose more than 1 Hydra head every 2 seconds. This will tremendously help with this build sustain. And then lastly, you can now buy crafting materials from Dank Memes. Again, only on the test server. Dank Memes is only available on the test server in order to facilitate testing. And that is going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video in which we discuss how Activision Blizzard claims that mobile is now its leading platform. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.